34 Celsius is possible towards the southeast. Strong sunshine, so high UV levels, very high pollen levels as well, and then a thundery breakdown for some this weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Murphy Moroki, and Bev Turner again on your TV, radio and online.
That's right, we are with you until midday with the day's big stories, lots of discussion with expert guests and even a few of our own opinions to try and stop us.
That's guaranteed. But the most important part, of course, is your views, so make sure you get them in on GB Views at gbnews.uk.
We'll be getting through those throughout the show, but first, here are the very important morning headlines.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson's been dealt a fresh blow after his ethics advisor resigned last night. In a brief statement, Lord Geidt said, with regret, he feels it's the right thing to do. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. There are calls for Lord Geidt's resignation letter, which reportedly explains why he stepped down, to be published. Downing Street says Mr Johnson's surprised by the resignation. Deputy editor at The Spectator, Freddie Gray, says it shows there are issues at number 10.
I suspect he's wanted to go for a while. Boris has been trying to persuade him to stay. He's finally gone. I think what you're seeing is a party that's eating itself alive and a government that increasingly is sort of incapable of sustaining Boris's leadership.
Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey has arrived at Westminster's Magistrates' Court after being charged with sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old's facing 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. Mr Spacey denies the allegations. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home after bodies were found. Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. Local police said a suspect led them to the location after confessing to the fatal shooting. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper later will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill. It aims to redress the balance between landlords and privately renting households across England. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says we need to radically increase building in this country to help fix the housing crisis.
It doesn't really matter if we're building social homes or market rate homes. We need to build all of these sorts of homes, and we need to the government needs to stop sort of applying sticking plaster after sticking plaster and actually tackle the root of this problem, which is supply.
The Bank of England is expected to hike interest rates for the 5th time in a row today, according to analysts. GDP fell by 0.3% in April, which economists say likely rules out anything more than a small rise. It's predicted the bank's Monetary Policy Committee will increase its base rate, already the highest in 13 years, from 1% to 1.25%. The UK could pull out of the European Human Rights Convention. It's after Strasbourg-based court blocked government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Downing Street said all options were on the table and hasn't ruled out withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary Dominic Raab told GB News the intervention from the Strasbourg court is disappointing.
I suppose it strengthens the case for a Bill of Rights, which I'm going to publish shortly, to replace the Human Rights Act and give us greater control over the interpretation of human rights, and in particular avoid Strasbourg applying what are tantamount to injunctions. And of course there's no power, there's no basis in the Convention for them to do so.
Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try and improve conviction rates for sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mercy and Bev with To The Point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Bev Turner. It's 10:05 and we're on your TV, radio and online. Here's what we've got for you today.
The government has so far failed to deport a single asylum seeker to Rwanda following that last-minute intervention by the European Court of Human Rights. And now asylum seekers who were on that cancelled flight are speaking out about what they experienced. You don't want to miss this. We're going to bring you up to speed on that and ask who controls our laws.
Yes, and the Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates today. Well, with the cost of living crisis deepening, national rail strikes over pay looming and poverty on the rise, we'll ask what this new development will mean for you.
And the actor Kevin Spacey is in court in London this morning, charged with allegations of sexual assault. Our Home and Security editor Mark White will be giving us the latest developments as they happen.
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well. We're here with you until midday and you can get in touch with your views at GBViews, at gbnews.uk. We'll get to as many as we can.
But first of all, I, for one, am very much looking forward to this. Mercy is going to give us her opinion on whether it is time for the UK to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights.
If you've opened a newspaper or flicked onto a news programme in the last couple of days, you would have seen that an 11th hour intervention by the European Court of Human Rights put a hold on the much-anticipated flight to Rwanda for illegal immigrants. Activists and immigration lawyers failed to have the flight halted when they took the case to the High Court last Friday. The judge there said there was material public interest in allowing the Home Secretary to go ahead with the policy. He was not convinced that there was any evidence migrants would be mistreated or that their human rights would be contravened if that first flight went ahead as planned. Our own Court of Appeal then upheld this judgment just a few days later, and it would be just half an hour before the flight was due to take off that the overreaching arm of the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, would swoop in and put a hold on takeoff and in the process give a slap in the face to those in the nation who elected a government that promises to deal with the issue of illegal immigration. Now, the debate has morphed even further, raising questions on whether Britain should seek to actually withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. It's something, actually, that former Prime Minister Theresa May fought for during her tenure as Home Secretary. The ECHR was the thorn in her side that prevented her from getting on with the job of enforcing British justice and securing the nation. Islamist extremist, for example, Abu Hamza, had his extradition severely delayed for years because of the ECHR. The European Court also nearly stopped radical cleric Abu Qatada from being deported. The government have often found themselves fighting tooth and nail to deport terrorists and foreign criminals from British streets because those dangerous individuals have claimed it breaches their human rights under the European Convention. While speaking out in favour of pulling out of the ECHR, Theresa May once said this, and I quote, "The ECHR can bind the hands of Parliament, adds nothing to prosperity, makes us less secure by preventing the deportation of dangerous foreign criminals, and does nothing to change the attitudes of governments like Russia's when it comes to human rights." And she's right, isn't she? Russia and Ukraine signed up to the ECHR a quarter of a century ago, and as of the end of last year, a quarter of applications awaiting allocation in the courts were from Russia. Of course, Russia was expelled in March upon its invasion of Ukraine. But my question is this: how have decades' worth of being in the European rights body exactly helped the situation? I'd suggest you ask the people who have been harmed by Russian bombs and gunfires. Well, look, there's something that needs to be called out as well. The absolute hysteria around the consequences of leaving the ECHR. Here's something else Prime Minister Theresa May said. She said, "This is Great Britain, the country of Magna Carta, parliamentary democracy, and the fairest courts in the world, and we can protect human rights ourselves in a way that doesn't jeopardise national security or bind the hands of Parliament." Human rights and freedoms have a deep, centuries-old root in Britain. We were the first country to actually ratify this European Convention on Human Rights in 1951, of course, after Winston Churchill was amongst the first to propose a Council of Europe to uphold citizens' rights. I find the idea that the British legislature and judiciary would be conspiring to roll back human rights, frankly, quite offensive. Leaving the ECHR does not mean we will be less free. Were we a bastion of tyranny and oppression before 1998, when the ECHR was brought into British domestic law? No, we were not. And those suggesting that leaving the ECHR would leave us as pariahs on the global stage, and those even suggesting we would become more like Russia, are either being disingenuous, deceitful, or downright idiotic. In fact, I would ask those people, is Australia not a free, civil, Western democracy? Because Australia has no National Bill of Rights. There's no Human Rights Act there. One argument made for this in Australia has been, guess what? Because it would empower unelected judges over elected representatives. And in fact, Australia rates higher than the UK on the Democracy Index, published by the Economist Intelligence Unit annually, an index which measures civil liberties and political culture in countries. It ranks 9th, Australia does, whilst the UK ranks in 18th place. Australia also, if you remember, managed to curb illegal boat crossings, something we have not yet managed to do. No thanks this time to the ECHR. We heard many times throughout the Brexit referendum of bringing in an Australian-based, points-based immigration system, Australian-style immigration system. And this was, of course, in relation to legal migration. But perhaps, just perhaps, we should further emulate Australia's approach, both for illegal immigration and for taking full control of our rights. Yes, well, look, I think there's a lot of hysteria going around at the moment in terms of, you know, the Tories want to strip out everybody of our rights. That's why they want to leave the ECHR. It's nothing of the like. I feel like it's Brexit all over again. People talking about the reasons why people wanted to vote Brexit, like there were reasons to do with racism or reasons to do with xenophobia, when actually it was about that sovereignty and it was about control for many, many people. And I do believe that people who want to withdraw from the ECHR also want us to take back control, to coin a phrase.
I'm glad we're talking about it. You know, that's the truth. That this is, if the ECHR is proving so difficult for us to live in the sort of country that we feel like we're in control of, then this is a conversation that we definitely need to be having, and I'm all in support of that. I'm also slightly worried at the moment about what the implications are to be. We're living in a country where it feels like so many of our civil liberties are currently at risk with the online safety bill and the protest bill, the public harms bill. I'm worried where we're going in terms of our freedoms. I'm worried about the last 2 years, and I wonder to what extent the ECHR will help the individual.
I do understand that, but I think what I would say is, well, if we are worried about that, and lots of people have a right to be worried about the government encroaching on our liberties, then we vote with our, you know, at the ballot box, and we get rid of, if we ever find that there's a government which is rolling back our civil liberties, then we vote them out. But if the European Convention on Human Rights, or the ECHR, was to do that, we have no way to stop that in a way. So I think the control should be ours. That's sort of my opinion on it.
Well, obviously the immigration situation has inspired us to have this conversation. It's huge. The immigration issue is one that you can never please all of the people all of the time on it, can you?
Yes.
But well done. I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Now, let's move on to something else. In Parliament yesterday, Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper accused Priti Patel of presiding over a shambles, and she had no one but herself to blame after the European Court of Human Rights, as we were saying, stopped that first deportation flight to Rwanda.
The Home Secretary hit back, of course, saying, and I quote, "Opposition members know that people are dying in the Channel, but they simply do not have a single workable solution between them."
Yes, well, the Prime Minister also hinted that the UK could leave the ECHR, and meanwhile, on Tuesday, at least 444 people crossed the Channel to arrive in the UK, which is the highest figure for 2 months.
So, to talk about this a little bit more, we're delighted to be joined by Tony Smith, former Director General of the UK Border Force. Tony, thank you so much for joining us this morning. 444 people crossed the Channel, but we can't manage to deport 7 people. In your opinion, do we have control of our borders?
No, not at the moment. And I'm glad this is being played out in public, and that people who are perhaps not quite as well acquainted with border control as I am are seeing how this system works. So you can see the government passed a new law. The Nationality and Borders Act 2022 has royal assent. That's now being challenged on the basis of some of the things you've just been talking about there, Mercy, about the conflict between democratically elected government laws to try and take back control of our borders versus judicial interpretations of international conventions, and particularly the International Convention on Human Rights that you've just been talking about. So from a border force point of view, this is hugely frustrating, because a lot of people blame the border force for this problem and say they're not really doing their job. But the border force and the Home Secretary are beholden unto the courts, and we cannot put the Home Secretary in contempt of court. That's what's playing now. And I think that's what people are now beginning to wake up to, that much as we would very much like to have much greater control over those coming across, it's actually in my book illegal. There will be lawyers who say it's not illegal because it's irregular migration. But either way, they're coming across on boats because they wouldn't be able to get through if they were to show their passport in Calais or try and get a visa like everybody else does, you see. So there's huge tension now between international law and domestic law, which is inhibiting the government's capability to actually stop people coming by this method and also to return people, because many other countries won't take people back, you see. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I think the government is doing everything it can, and this government is trying to take back control. But now I think people can see some of the obstacles that are being put in their way, which aren't necessarily in their control.
Let's talk about some of those obstacles. Obviously, the big one that's in the news over the last couple of days is that Echr interim decision to put a hold on this flight to Rwanda. If, as the government plans, they do commission another flight and migrants do get sent to Rwanda, whenever that will be, do you think that will be an effective deterrent? I mean, to what extent do you think this will actually work?
Yeah, I've been asked that a lot, Mercy, over the last few days, and I don't know whether it will or whether it won't, if I'm brutally honest with you. But I think what people need to understand is that we can't remove boat arrivals. The French won't take them back. The EU won't take them back. And many of the source and transit countries that they come from in the first place won't take them back either, whether or not they qualify to stay here, you see. So the government's running out of options about, well, the best way to disincentivize this is to say to people, you're not going to get what you want. You're not going to get settlement in the UK. But in order to do that, we need to find somewhere to send people to that meets all of these tests. That is a safe country which is prepared to offer them refuge if that's what they want, because they really don't want to go back to the country they came from in the first place. The government's done a lot of work looking for places and have come up with Rwanda. Now, this is what the big debate about is now. Is Rwanda safe or not? And that's what the courts are testing. What the UK court said last week is, well, there isn't enough evidence at the moment to suggest that anybody sent to Rwanda, like on that flight this week, would be harmed. And I would have liked to see even some go to, so that you guys could cover it. And, why don't you go and see what happens in Rwanda? The media is massive now, and international media. You could see where they're being housed, how they're being treated. Have a look at this. Let's have some scrutiny. But the government can't get anybody on a flight even to test that proposition because of intervention by the courts. So I do hope we are able to, overcome these obstacles and come up with a solution that would enable us to come to agreement with not just Rwanda but other third countries to take people back. Because if we can't do that, we are, I'm afraid, losing control of our borders. And it's not just here. It's happening in the EU. It's happening in America. It's happening in a lot of different countries where very large numbers of people now are moving across borders and claiming asylum and human rights, and thus effectively undermining border controls.
OK, super. Thank you, Tony. Tony Smith there, former Director General of the UK Border Force. Now, coming up after the break, the Prime Minister's ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, has resigned. Lord Geidt has resigned. We'll be asking how significant a blow is this for Boris Johnson. Don't go away.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, a very good morning. The time's 10:22 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki and Bev Turner on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Now, the PM's ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, has quit a day after saying there was a legitimate question about whether Prime Minister Boris Johnson broke ministerial rules over Partygate. Lord Geidt did not give a reason for leaving the role he took only last year, but said it was the right thing to do.
Yes, well, his predecessor, Sir Alex Allen, quit in 2020 after Mr Johnson overruled him over a report into alleged bullying by Home Secretary Priti Patel, while the government said it was surprised by Lord Geidt's decision. And with us in the studio to discuss all of this is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, 2 resignations of an ethics advisor in such a short space of time. Quite a damning indictment, is it not, of the Prime Minister?
It's a tricky situation, certainly, especially as after Sir Alex Allen resigned over, if you remember, the Priti Patel report, where the Home Secretary was accused of bullying. The Prime Minister said he wanted to stick with Prit rather than removing her as Home Secretary at that time. And over that affair, Sir Alex Allen stood down. It took several months to find Lord Geidt. Lord Geidt is a well-respected individual. He's been at the top of British society for a long time. He's worked at the Palace. He's a member of the House of Lords. To coax him into the role, Downing Street expended a lot of energy, and it took about 5 months to finally get him there by April 2021. Well, just over a year after his appointment, he's out. Although it seems shocking, to many people this has not come as a particular surprise. The idea that Lord Geidt was flirting with resignation has been around for quite some time. There's been several briefing notes about it, and indeed over the last few months, several points where he was considering stepping down. Even before Partygate, Lord Geidt put out feelers in terms of standing down over the curtains of Downing Street, if we remember all the way back to that last summer.
That was the renovation.
This is the renovation.
The expensive interior design work by apparently Boris Johnson's wife.
Exactly, and there were questions over the funding of it and the loans and exactly where the cash was coming from and how it was declared. That was a situation where Lord Geidt almost resigned but didn't, and then, of course, over Partygate, several instances of potentially resigning and then not. Well, strangely, it was this week, a week where there hasn't been any new news that has broken out. However, Lord Geidt did appear before a Commons committee, the Constitutional Affairs Committee, just a few days ago, and potentially that's something that might have pushed him over the edge. Although really interesting in this entire affair is that ordinarily when there's a resignation of a senior advisor or indeed a minister, there's what's called an exchange of letters. A letter is published, a resignation letter, alongside an acceptance letter from the Prime Minister. We don't have these letters in this case. We only have one short statement from Lord Geidt. It's likely these letters have been written, but they haven't been made public.
And is that unprecedented?
That is not, to my knowledge, something that has happened. That is not, to my knowledge, something that's happened in this Parliament. It's not something that happened in the previous Parliament. Now, it may be this might have happened back in the 80s, I'm not sure. But this is certainly unusual.
And what is that indicative of for you?
Well, potentially, it's obscuring a reasoning behind this resignation. There are a lot of questions to ask exactly over what led to this particular resignation, because Lord Geidt hasn't specified one in the very short statement that he published. But the Downing Street statement talks about asking Lord Geidt in the last few days for advice over an area of national importance that previously had a cross-party agreement. And they're very sort of obfuscatory over what this particular request for advice was. So potentially that's something to do with it. But frankly, until these letters get leaked, and there's a widespread expectation that they may well get leaked over the next few days, but until and unless that happens, we're a bit in the dark.
So the recent parliamentary committee meeting that Lord Geidt took part in, was that public? Do we have the notes of that particular minute? And there was no clues in there for political sleuth Tom Harwood to pick apart?
That was a public committee excoriating account of... he was sitting before that committee being asked questions of... Nothing new, but there were some awkward moments, and some moments where the chairman of that committee is an MP called William Ragg. He's been he's a Conservative MP, a critic of the Prime Minister, and indeed a member of the 1922 committee executive as well. So there were some pretty tough questions going from Mr Ragg and indeed his colleagues on that committee as Lord Geidt sort of shuffled uncomfortably before them. Potentially that might have been a trigger, but obviously Lord Geidt is just saying he felt like it was the right time to go, the right thing to do were his words. It's curious that he's not expanding more widely on that, although I have to say there is a wide expectation that we may well learn more in the coming days.
I wonder if it will do Boris Johnson any particular harm, though, at the moment. I think if you generally, at the moment, you have an opinion on Boris Johnson's ethics, or you don't. Do you know what I mean? Everybody has an opinion, really, in one way, actually, in terms of Boris Johnson's ethical behaviour. So I don't know whether this resignation will change anybody's mind in terms of how they feel about Boris Johnson, if you know what I mean.
I think that's a really key point. To what extent are these incidents priced in? Because members of Parliament, 148 of his own members of Parliament, declared no confidence in him so early, without a sort of particular trigger around that time. Almost a lot of what that vote was about were expected things to come. People who voted in that vote were almost expecting that Lord Geidt would resign, expecting that 2 by-elections may well be lost next week. All of these incidents that potentially people thought were just around the corner fed into that vote. So it doesn't necessarily move the waterline above where it was, because in some ways it was an expectation that delivered that vote in the first place. The real question, I suppose, is what are going to be the truly unexpected developments in this long-winded tale, because, as I say, Lord Geidt had floated the possibility of resigning several times over the last few months. So not the biggest bombshell in the world, some curiosity around it, but I think, frankly, yes, very few minds of MPs, the people who really matter in terms of whether the Prime Minister remains in his job or not, very few of those minds will be changed.
What will Boris Johnson do now? Because presumably he has to find a replacement. And I'm not sure that an advert for Boris Johnson's ethics advisor is going to have that many people queuing up. So, given the climate of the last 6 months that he's been subjected to, is it a poison chalice, Tom, in terms of being a job?
It's a very tough gig. Indeed, it was very hard to find Lord Geidt in the first place, to coax and persuade Lord Geidt to take this on, because I think few people will say Lord Geidt's reputation has been enhanced by his year and a couple of months in this role. It's going to be interesting to see whether Downing Street will be able to find a new person who is respected enough to hold it, but also is willing to take it in the next few months. As I say, I think it was about 5 months that the search for Lord Geidt took in the first place. Will Boris Johnson be able to find one in just a few months? I think it's a big, big question, but also it's a key question, because Boris Johnson can't be seen to be marking his own homework on ethics. It's a very key time to have an independent voice.
I'm thinking he might be in the running for it. I'm not sure that Stanley Johnson would be right to be the ethics advisor.
No, and I think there's also the idea that he doesn't want to be seen to appoint a sycophant. There's a lot of bad headlines to be drawn by the accusations of trying to whitewash anything. So there needs to be a rigorous, independent-minded, respected member of civic society in there in number 10, carrying out these investigations and doing doing that work, but that's going to be a tough person to find.
Yeah,
indeed.
Job applications.
Will. Yes, well.
10 Downing Street.
Thank you,
Tom.
Tom.
You're so good.
Yes, now, after the break, the Bank of England is set to raise interest rates today, and we're going to explore how this will affect you. We'll be speaking to our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. But before that, here's your morning headlines.
It's 10:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson's been dealt a fresh blow after his ethics advisor resigned last night. In a brief statement, Lord Geidt said, with regret, he feels it's the right thing to do. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. Downing Street says Mr Johnson's surprised by the resignation. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey has appeared at Westminster Magistrates' Court after being charged with sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faces 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. Mr Spacey denies the allegations. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home after bodies were found. Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper later will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 150 graves, 40 graves rather. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. Finds include a skeleton with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. TV Online and DAB+ Radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.210 to the dollar. It's 1.164 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,514.64 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
10:36. This is To The Point with Patrick Mercy and well, you've spotted the deliberate mistake. I'm not Patrick Mercy. I am Bev Turner. I'm Mercy Muroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning. I think that bit's been cut and pasted.
Yeah, that's not great, is it? She identifies as Patrick today. Yeah.
Patrick's back tomorrow, right?
No.
Oh, is he not? Oh, I'm sorry.
He's not.
I don't know.
But
where
he is back later today. He's doing, I believe he's covering for Dan Wootton. So
Yes,
if you want Patrick, you can catch him at 9 p.m.
Doing a brilliant job of covering for Dan Wootton every night. But I thought he was back tomorrow, but maybe not.
I
Anyway,
have Nana
should we do a
tomorrow.
programme?
Anyway,
Talk about
yes,
news.
let's do that. Well, Scottish police officers are considering taking industrial action after rejecting a £565 pay increase. Broken down, that works out at an extra £11 a week, which officers believe is inadequate.
So far, the Scottish Police Federation say that no talks have taken place between them and the Scottish Government. Our reporter, David Donaldson, has more.
Police Scotland stretched to the limit during COP26 in Glasgow last year. Now the Scottish Police Federation, which represents all officers, are looking for a pay increase of 3.4%. But Callum Steele from the Federation says the offer made by the Scottish Government doesn't come close.
It is derisory. It only represents just over 2% for the very lowest earning police officers. It's less than 1% for a huge number of our members. At this time, it just doesn't come close to touching the sides of the challenges that are facing police officers, the same as everyone else in the public sector. But you have to recognise that police officers do not have the same industrial rights as everyone else, and the fact that our pay offer not only does it not recognise that, but seems to actively disregard it in terms of its quantum, shows a dripping contempt for police officers by this government and by our employer.
The pay dispute comes as the Scottish Government has offered at least a 5% pay increase to rail workers at ScotRail. But the Scottish Police Federation say no talks have taken place, and although they can't strike, they are looking at taking industrial action.
Well, at this precise moment in time, there's just no dialogue taking place. The Scottish Government seems, for some bizarre reason, to be suggesting that negotiations are ongoing. Not only are negotiations not ongoing, there have been no negotiations, full stop. We submitted our claim in February. We heard nothing through until we received a formal offer in May. We have heard nothing since we have rejected that offer. So very clearly, the Scottish Police Federation and our members are considering a whole variety of different actions that we take next.
So 17,000 police officers across Scotland will be consulted over industrial action over the dispute with pay. Well, the Scottish Government have released a statement. It says police officer pay is negotiated through the Police Negotiating Board and has been for many years. The PNB process is ongoing in relation to pay for 2022-2023, and therefore it's not appropriate for the Scottish Government to comment. There we have it then. Neither side could even agree that talks are taking place, never mind reaching a settlement. David Donaldson, GB News.
Well, there you are. Police may strike in Scotland. We'll keep an eye on that story, of course, for you on GB News. But for now, the Bank of England looks set to raise interest rates today for the 5th time since December, its steepest run of rate hikes in 25 years.
Now, this comes after America's central bank, the Federal Reserve, announced its largest interest rate rise since 1994.
Yes, well, the rates rises are likely to keep going in the coming months as inflation heads for double figures.
So with us in the studio now, I am delighted to say, because I'm a big fan, economics and business editor Liam Halligan. Hi, Liam.
But I'm not Patrick Christie's.
Well, you have...
You're better than Patrick Christie.
Listen, you both have talents, right? You both have talents. Yours is understanding this stuff. Now, I am dragging up knowledge from my A-level economics here. The relationship between interest rates and inflation. Just explain that to us.
Well, when inflation goes up, and it's up at the moment, obviously we're at 9% is the retail price index. That means prices on average are 9% higher than this time last year. I actually reckon it's a lot more than that. I think 9% inflation is a sick joke for most people. It's a lot more than that. But when inflation is high, what central banks try and do is slow down the economy in order to slow down those price rises. They kind of take away some of the demand in the economy. It sounds cruel. Of course, it is cruel, but the sense is that inflation is worse than an economic slowdown, because when you get inflation, you get cost of living spiralling, firms stop investing, and you get a slowdown anyway. So what the Bank of England has been doing since December in successive monthly meetings, as you rightly said there, it's been raising interest rates from ultra-low levels. What's happened now is that even though we've been raising interest rates here in the UK, in the Eurozone, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve in the US, inflation's still been heading up. And so people are getting scared that you're going to get too much inflation expectations in the system. Everyone thinks prices are going up, so they put their prices up, so prices go up, and then wages go up, and then prices go up even more because wages are high. That's called a wage price spiral. I'm old enough to remember that in the 1970s. Neither of you two are, of course, but I do. And the danger is that when you get that wage price spiral, you then get into the realms of 15, 20, 25% inflation. Then you have not a 1970s situation, you have a 1930s situation.
So the inflation that we've got now at the moment, isn't this because we've had so much quantitative easing in the last few years? Banks have just been printing money here and overseas. Double that with the fuel crisis, which apparently is because of the war in Ukraine.
It's multifaceted. You're right. The Bank of England, other central banks, after that 2008 financial crisis, which we are all old enough to remember, we reported on it. After that crisis, central banks around the world were worried the banking system was going to collapse. So they just created lots of money, not physical money. They created it in their computer systems and handed it out to the banks who lent it on. And that has caused some inflation. And as you rightly say, the war in Ukraine has led to higher food prices, higher fuel prices, because, of course, Russia is a major fuel exporter. But there's been lots of inflation in the system for a number of years anyway, because after the pandemic, you had this massive surging demand after we'd been locked up for 2 years, and the global economy couldn't respond. Factories were still discombobulated, all the freight tankers were in the wrong place, no semiconductors, car makers were on go slow for all kinds of reasons. So there's many, many, many reasons for this inflation. But you're right. We're in a situation now where even if the Bank of England raises interest rates, and it will today at 12 o'clock, the question is by how much, that's not going to mean that suddenly...
we're not going to spend any money.
That does,
it doesn't, but it's not going to do anything. I'm thinking about from the individual point of view, Liam, like, so we've got prices going up at the petrol points, we've got prices going up at the shops, and now our mortgages are going to go up, because that's the implication, depending on what sort of mortgage rate you're on. Put up the interest rates, it's going to hit the individual again, isn't it? It
will, and that's why people like me have been saying for many years, raise interest rates, because if you raise interest rates earlier, before we get into an inflation panic, which we're now on the cusp of, you can raise them by less and you can raise them more slowly. Literally for years, people like me, we've been called inflation hawks, alarmist. We've been saying, raise interest rates now.
They have been really low, haven't they?
They have, and they still are really low. And even if they go up by the same amount as the Federal Reserve in America just raised interest rates, they'll still be 1.75%. You know, 10 years ago, interest rates were 4%, 5%, 6%. So they'll still be really low, but they'll be much higher than they are. And there's a whole generation of consumers now that aren't used to high interest rates. People are on mortgages of 0.5%, 1%. And even if they stay low, if your mortgage rate goes from like 1.5% to 3%, right? That's double, even though the overall mortgage rate is still quite low. So this will cause pain.
Tell me about it. My mortgage rate ends this autumn, and I'm being told to find a new one. This might not be your area of expertise.
No, go for it.
But what would your advice be to people like me who are going to see our interest rates going up in our mortgages? Is there any option to shop around, or...?
There is. The mortgage market, unlike, you know, electricity prices, you can't shop around because there's a cap and everyone knows that they're going up. Mortgage market, it is still quite competitive, so fix as quickly as you can.
Yep, Liam, thank you so much for joining us and explaining all that. And you will be back, what time, quickly?
1 p.m. on the money.
1 p.m. on the money, there you go. Well, now, Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey has appeared in court in London charged with allegations of sexual assault, with most of the alleged offences dating back more than a decade.
So GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White is outside Westminster Magistrates Court. Good morning, Mark. What do these allegations involve?
Good morning to you. Yes, it was about a half-hour hearing for Kevin Spacey in court number 1 here at Westminster Magistrates Court as he arrived here earlier. Media bun-flight, as you would imagine, lots of interest in this case. In fact, I'm just going to duck out of the way just to stop annoying all my colleagues here, the photographers and camera crews here, just to give you a shot of the front of the door of Westminster Magistrates Court, where it's possible in the next few minutes that Kevin Spacey will exit this building. Now, he appeared for, as I say, half an hour in the dock there. He spoke only to confirm his name, Kevin Spacey Fowler, but then after was referred to as Kevin Spacey, confirmed his address that he's staying at in London and his date of birth. Now, he faces a total of 5 counts of sexual assault, 2 charges relating to an alleged incident that we're told took place in 2005, allegedly against a man who is now aged in his 40s. The second offence relates to an incident that is alleged to have taken place in 2008 against a man who is now, we're told, aged in his 30s. And then the third offence relates to an event that took place in 2013 with allegations of a sexual assault against another man now aged in his 30s. No pleas entered at this stage, but Kevin Spacey has been released on unconditional bail to appear again, this time at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. So because one of the offences is an indictable offence, it requires that it be sent to the Crown Court. So that next appearance will be on the 14th of July with Kevin Spacey, and we're expecting that there'll be this kind of interest again. We'll just show you just now, actually, an indication of the level of interest here. Dozens and dozens of camera crews, photographers, reporters from all around the world, because of course Kevin Spacey is a Hollywood A-lister, a 2-time Oscar winner who starred in many notable movies, so understandably a lot of interest in the ongoing case.
And do we know, Mark, do we have any idea when Kevin Spacey might emerge from the building today? I guess the proceedings will end at some point, probably roughly mid-afternoon, I would have thought.
Yeah. So it could be any time now that he comes out of the building. The difficulty we had was that when he arrived here for his appearance, even though the security team here at Westminster Magistrates Court had cleared a path for him to get in, it only takes one photographer or camera crew to sort of step out of that pathway, and then everybody joins in. And sure enough, I've covered so many of these over the years, that's exactly what happened. It was the usual media circus with Kevin Spacey trying to get into court, surrounded by dozens of pushing and jostling camera crews and photographers. But he made it in safely. We're expecting that he will come out this front door again. There was a contingency to allow him to exit from a side door if the security personnel thought that there was a potential danger to his safety. But I think despite the pushing and the shoving, he was fine with that. So he will probably exit from this main door. But again, quite when he's ready to come out, we don't know. But he's said, determined to fight the case against him robustly in the courts. That was said again by his lawyers today, although no formal plea has been submitted at this stage. He has previously said that he denies the allegations against him. As I say, 5 counts of sexual assault against 3 men that are alleged to have taken place between 2005 and 2013. Now, one of those charges is an indictable offence, and because that is an indictable offence, it can't then be heard continuously here at a magistrate's court. It has to go up to the next level, of course, which is the Crown Court, and it's been scheduled for the 14th of July at Southwark Crown Court. And of course, here we go. Sadly, as we often see with these events, you get someone with a speaker and something that he wants to say to the press turning up. But I think hopefully he should be moved on shortly. As I say, we're expecting Kevin Spacey out any time now.
OK, thank you very much, Mark. Mark White, there, our security correspondent. We will bring you any news from there as we get it. We're also going to be bringing you the news on the interest rates. We were just talking to Liam about that. Because families across the UK say they cannot handle any further outgoings.
Yeah, that's not surprising, is it, really? Our North East of England reporter, Rachel Sweeney, is at a children's play centre with some parents now. Rachel, of course, families are what make up this country, every society, and they're the people who struggle most, especially people who have children and little mouths to feed. What are some of the worries from the parents you've been speaking to?
Hello, well, I'm here at the Woodland Play Patch in Houghton-le-Spring, where conversation has changed so dramatically. Mothers would come here with their kids and talk about holidays they had planned or parenting trends while the kids played, but I'm told that now it's just bills, 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 how they're going to pay it, cost of living. Joining me now is Kimberly Duffy, who is a mother to lovely Eleanor, who is somewhere, and also Sophie Williams, who owns the Woodland Play Patch. Sophie, let's just start with you. What difference have you noticed in the morale of parents here?
So, predominantly we are huge on the community. Our customers are coming in on a regular basis, so we really get to know who they are. Generally, the conversations are holidays, Christmas. We're in June, people are already talking about Christmas because they're worried they're not going to be able to afford to buy and to have the Christmases that they've been giving their children over previous years. Starting to buy Christmas presents now to reduce the impact that that's going to have come November and December, which is when they would normally be buying presents. Holidays are non-existent. People have been putting off holidays that they had booked, which have actually already been postponed from previous years due to COVID, because they're just worried that any money that they do have now, they might not have available to them in the next couple of months.
Well, interest rates are likely to rise today. The question is, as Liam has said earlier, by how much? Let's go to Kimberly Duffy, who is a mother. If interest rates go up today, which they're likely to, how is that going to impact you?
Well, it's going to be having to make further cutbacks with things like of day-to-day life, things like our food shopping would have to change, and even possibly like downgrading our car, because the rise in cost in petrol and everything's really, really affecting well.
OK, Kimberly and Sophie, thank you so much. We'll be back after the announcement for reaction here at Houghton-le-Spring Woodland Play Patch.
Thank you, Rachel. Well done. Rachel Sweeney there, our North East of England correspondent. You know what? Play centres with kids make me come out in hives. It brings back memories of being there with my
good memories or...
It's the smell. The smell of like sweaty feet and dust. I'm sure that one does not smell. It looked beautiful. It looked very nicely put together. But anyone who's spent any time in a soft play centre will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they are a parent's worst nightmare, aren't they, really? And all the germs and stuff.
I'm not bothered about the germs.
Yeah, I'm not bothered about the germs. I think it keeps them healthy, but there is a lot of germs in there, especially what with COVID. We won't get into that.
But listen, I'm being flippant. It is a very serious topic. We are really feeling this. As we say, we're hoping that we'll get some news during this next hour about the interest rates and by how much they're going to go up. As we heard from Liam, the chances are they will, but just by how much. What has everyone been saying to us, Mercy?
Yes, so lots of views coming in. As usual, thank you to everybody who's been getting in touch. Michaela says, it's time to withdraw from the European Rights Convention and time for us to use our own laws to deport these young men who are coming here.
And this is a lot of people responding to your monologue. Yes. This is Alan. He's a veteran, and he said, excellent monologue, Mercy. All this talk of leaving the ECHR, it isn't. It's reversing what Blair did in 1998 by incorporating it into UK domestic law.
Yeah, exactly, with that Human Rights Act that came in 1998. Adrian has said, hi, Mercy and Bev, the ECHR has gone down the American route. Criminals have more rights than citizens. That's Adrian's opinions there. And Anne says the French authorities should actually be charged by the ECHR for allowing immigrants to put their lives in danger by crossing the channel and knowingly allowing them to put themselves in dangerous circumstances. So interesting views there. Keep them all coming in to our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll be back very shortly with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after the break.
Hello, it's going to turn fine and dry across the bulk of the UK in the next couple of days. There will be some rain in the northwest through Thursday, but elsewhere it'll be fine, dry and turning increasingly hot and humid. If we look at the pressure pattern then through the rest of Thursday, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. And as we head into Thursday into Friday, we start to drag in a more southerly airflow, and that's really going to lift those temperatures. So I think Friday will be the peak of the heat, where we could see temperatures in the low to locally mid-30s. Back to Thursday afternoon, then you can see some rain towards the north and the west, affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Aberdeenshire. But elsewhere across the bulk of England, Wales, Northern England as well, it'll be fine and dry. Variable amounts of cloud at times in the west, but still plenty of sunshine to come. And in that southeast corner, look at these temperatures. We could see highs of 29 or 30 degrees. That would make it the warmest day of the year so far. Still cooler though towards the north and the west. As we head through the rest of Thursday into the evening and overnight, then you can see heavy, more persistent rain spreading in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So turning quite wet here, some strong winds developing as well. But elsewhere across the bulk of England and Wales, it'll be another dry night, variable amounts of cloud and a warm and muggy night to come, particularly in the south where we can see lows just falling to 19 or 20 degrees, a little bit cooler further towards the north. As we look into Friday then, you can see that heavy rain still affecting much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, continuing for much of the day, slowly pushing its way southwards as we head through the day. But elsewhere across England and Wales, look at this, fine, dry, plenty of sunshine, and with those southerly winds that I mentioned, temperatures really will lift. So probably the peak of the heat, like I said, we could see widely temperatures across England and Wales into the low 30s, but in the southeast corner, 33 or 34 degrees, quite exceptional for the time of the year. Once again, cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we head through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight. That cold front will slowly sink its way southwards, affecting Northern England, Northern Wales by the end of the night. To the north of it, it will be cooler and fresher, but again, another warm, muggy night across England and Wales. Quite uncomfortable for sleeping, I think. Gradually, it will turn more unsettled as we head into the weekend. We will see a thundery breakdown across much of England and Wales. That will clear and will turn fresher for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning. It's 11 o'clock and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Bev Turner on your TV, radio and online.
We are with you until midday with this show jam-packed with all of today's big stories, lots of discussion, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with those opinions. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to some throughout the programme.
That's right, we will, but first it is time for the latest news.
Good morning, it's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The resignation letter of the Prime Minister's former ethics advisor will be published, along with Boris Johnson's reply, the government said. It's after Lord Geidt made a surprise resignation yesterday. Downing Street has been under pressure to release the document, which is thought to explain his reasons for stepping down. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. In a brief statement, he said with regret he feels it's the right thing to do. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab told GBNews he was surprised to hear of the resignation.
There's also the fact that he was talking to Number 10 just this week about an extension for 6 months, so I was surprised to hear the news, and I know there was a specific issue which is commercially sensitive, so I'm limited in what I can say, that he was asked to look at and in the national interest, and again, I don't know whether it was related to that. I think we'll hear more today. Number 10 will give a further update.
Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey has been granted unconditional bail after being charged with sexually assaulting 3 men. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. The 62-year-old's facing 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. Mr Spacey wasn't asked to enter pleas. His next appearance will be at Southwark Crown Court on 14th of July. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home. That's after bodies were found. Tom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. Local police say a suspect led them to the location after confessing to the fatal shooting. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper later will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill.
Your name.
And these are live images now of the Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey leaving the Westminster Magistrates Court. As I was saying earlier, he wasn't asked to enter pleas. He's been charged with sexually assaulting 3 men. He denies the charges against him. He's been granted unconditional bail. Live images there of Kevin Spacey leaving Westminster Magistrates Court just after being granted unconditional bail. And back to that story of tenants being given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says there needs to be more building of homes across the country.
It doesn't really matter if we're building social homes or market rate homes. We need to build all of these sorts of homes, and we need to the government needs to stop sort of applying sticking plaster after sticking plaster and actually tackle the root of this problem, which is supply.
The UK could pull out of the European Human Rights Convention. It's after Strasbourg-based court blocked government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Downing Street said all options were on the table and hasn't ruled out withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. The Bank of England is expected to hike interest rates for the 5th time in a row today. That's according to analysts. GDP fell by 0.3% in April, which economists say likely rules out anything more than just a small rise. It's predicted the bank's Monetary Policy Committee will increase its base rate, already the highest in 13 years, from 1% to 1.25%. Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try and improve conviction rates of sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Mercy and Bev with To The Point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Bev Turner. It's 11:06 and we're on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up in the final hour.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson is considering a withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights after it was used to stop the government from flying asylum seekers to Rwanda. But how would this work? We're going to be asking barrister Adam Wagner in just a moment.
Yes, and American candy stores have been popping up all over the country with shops in Bath, Cambridge, Cardiff, Edinburgh and, of course, London. But why the rapid spread and why are the ones on Oxford Street under investigation by Westminster Council? We'll look into that more.
Speaking of sweets, childhood diabetes rates are through the roof as Britain's obesity crisis worsens. Who is to blame? Food companies, parents or the government? Let us know what you think.
Yes, that's all coming up over the next hour and much more as well across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first, Bev gives her views on the World Health Organisation renaming monkeypox to avoid racism.
Now, if like me, you've spent the last 2 years developing a finely tuned nose for powerful people making decisions without your best interests at heart, then your antennae will be working overtime on the creeping threat of monkeypox. Those infected were recently told to self-isolate, and the WHO even suggested we might have to wear masks, even though the virus isn't airborne, and 151 of the 152 cases researched here in the UK were in men who had had sex with other men. The WHO are now convening an emergency committee to determine if monkeypox should be considered a global health emergency. I'll save them the effort. In my opinion, it is not. On a planet of 8 billion people, there have only been 1,600 confirmed cases of monkeypox this year across 39 countries, with 72 deaths, none of those in the newly affected regions. It is all so familiar. An emergency which would help technocrats and weak governments to push through plans to surveil and control you by setting up a digital biometric ID system linking the state and private businesses. But unlike COVID, this time social media sprung into action, satirising monkeypox with memes so brilliantly observed that health authorities with financial incentives have little chance of terrifying us into our homes again. So guess what? Yesterday we had a very solemn announcement from the WHO's Director General, Tedros Ghebreyesus, intoning that they're considering changing the name of monkeypox. Oh no, it is not because we all think it's rather funny rather than frightening, and humour is the best way to undermine a collective of despotic megalomaniacs. No, that's not why. They're changing the name because it is discriminatory and stigmatising. To who? Monkeys? Are we meant to think there are monkeys sat around drinking tea, shaking their heads at being demonised by this virus that was originally found in lab monkeys in 1958? No offence to any monkeys who are watching. I'm so sorry, that's just a fact. A scientific paper released last week swapped monkeypox to HMPXV, which admittedly would be much harder to build a joke around. The scientists added that a neutral, non-discriminatory and non-stigmatising name will be more appropriate for the global health community. But don't worry, the USA approved the first vaccine for monkeypox in September 2019. Funny that, Joe Biden has quickly spent $119 million on them, with another $180 million set aside for more. This is before we even start talking about possible widespread immune problems, shingles or chickenpox, which might be wrongly diagnosed. So I, for one, will keep laughing at monkeypox until they can prove me wrong.
Yes, I think one of the suggestions was that it could be racist to black people. This was one of the suggestions as well, which is...
How do you feel about that?
Well, I always find it funny when people call other people racist for saying something about monkeys. Somebody was telling me about a story, I can't remember who it is now. It might have been you, actually. Somebody said, oh, you cheeky monkey or something.
Yes, we were discussing that, weren't we, yesterday?
To a black person, and then they sued for racist discrimination. Well, for me, you're the person who's linking black people to monkeys, so actually you're the racist for suggesting that it would even be racist in the first place. Because when I hear monkey, or if somebody calls me a cheeky monkey, or well, nobody calls me that, but, you know, I don't think...
You don't automatically assume that that's a racist...
I mean, it's very bizarre.
I guess for, you know, years and years and years ago, of course, that would have been used as a slur in playgrounds for children who didn't know any better, you know. But I think we've moved on. I just don't think it's anything to do with racism. I think it's just, as I made clear, I think it's just, it's a rebranding exercise for monkeypox, because we all find monkeypox quite funny. Not funny, obviously, if you have been hurt by it in some countries, but we treat it well. We have drugs, and it shouldn't be, what I'm saying is it should not be amplified into something that's
absolutely. Let's stop the hysteria. We don't need another couple of years of all of that, do we, really? Well, let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But now moving on to a story we spoke about an hour ago, illegal migration across the Channel. On Tuesday, 444 at least illegal migrants crossed the Channel, and we couldn't even deport 7 of them to Rwanda. Of course, that was stopped on that flight by the European Court of Human Rights at the 11th hour.
Now, Number 10 have said that the UK may pull out of the human rights deal as Home Secretary Priti Patel insists on pushing ahead with her offshore processing policy. But
go on.
But will it actually happen? And what are the consequences?
Yes, well, Adam Wagner is a barrister at Doughty?
I think it's Doughty
Street. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. Doughty Street Chambers, and joins us now. Good morning, Adam. Really good to have you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I gave a monologue about an hour ago and said, look, withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights, which was we ratified in 1951 and was brought into sort of UK legislation through the Human Rights Act in 1998. It's not this dramatic, hysterical, doesn't need dramatics and hysterics around it. And actually, we wouldn't necessarily be less free. What do you make of my opinion on that?
I agree there shouldn't be dramatics and hysterics, because I think these things can take on a sort of religious character at some point. You know, people say, well, the European Convention it can do nothing wrong, or there should never be any kind of international supervision of legal rights. And I think that the reality is that if you look back at the history of the European Convention, it wasn't a sort of ideological, extreme view. It was taken by the UK. I mean, it was the Winston Churchill who was the originator, really, of the European Convention. He was its big cheerleader, along with David Maxwell Fyfe, who was he prosecuted the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg on behalf of the UK, and he ended up being the Conservative Home Secretary. And he was chair of the drafting committee of the European Convention, and their approach was, after the Second World War, it was non-sustainable to have every state having its own sort of sealed legal system, which could end up being co-opted by fascists, by communists, or whatever totalitarian ideology was in vogue at the time. And there had to be some sort of international standards. And where did those international standards come from? Well, some of them came from the British common law, some of them came from European law, and they were agreed worldwide by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then sort of distilled into the European Convention. And the idea was to sort of have a backstop, so not a set of judges who would decide every decision or even a lot of decisions relating to each state, but at the very edges of law, when things were going wrong in terms of protecting particularly vulnerable groups, there would be a kind of backstop in Strasbourg, which is the European Court of Human Rights.
So,
and I think it works pretty well.
So, Adam, what are the implications? Help us understand this in real terms. If we do extract ourselves from this agreement, what will the implications be for most people on the street? Anything?
Yeah, the UK would no longer be a leader, as it has been, in international human rights and in making sure that enforceable legal standards apply across hundreds of millions of people across the whole of Europe. and that was part of an arrangement that's put in place after the Second World War, after 2 world wars, in actual fact, in the space of 2 decades, that had decimated the continent. And it's extremely important that the UK has always played a really big role in making sure that other states keep to those standards, and that we ourselves keep to those standards. So it's not going to make a sort of difference in the sense that when you walk down to the shops you won't notice the difference, but it will dismantle piece by piece a really important protection that we have across Europe to make sure that states keep up to international standards. And don't forget that this relates to, those international standards relate to genocide, they relate to war crimes, and in the European Convention they relate to the death penalty. These are really important.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, I'm not sure.
And it would be a big shame if we decided that we would no longer want to be a leader. It would send a signal.
I'm not sure the
to
people
places
of
like
Ukraine.
Russia.
I'm not sure the people of Ukraine, who of course have also ratified this, will find much solace in that, to be honest, because of course what's happening to them has happened to them by Russia, who was until very recently also a member state of the European Court of Human Rights. But let's talk about it specifically in relation to the issue that has raised this, which is deporting illegal migrants or asylum seekers, however you want to call it. Why should it be the case that people who've come here illegally should not be deported to a safe country under an agreement by the United Kingdom government? Why should the ECHR stop deportations of criminals and foreign criminals?
I mean, I think your question, you've mixed up quite a lot of different things, and just to untangle them. So these are not foreign criminals. That's a different issue. These are not
I'm aware, but that has happened in the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure you are aware because you mixed it all up. But the point is that these are not people who have failed their asylum applications. They're not people who have committed serious crimes in the UK, not the usual people who we argue about being deported. These are people who have just arrived, are potentially refugees, who have good asylum claims, who may have been tortured in their home country, who are exactly the kind of sort of huddled masses that we've always tried to be open to, and particularly after the Second World War, when these asylum laws were put into place and conventions. And what we're not sending them to a safe country, we're sending them to an unsafe country. Rwanda has not got a safe asylum system. It's got a really shaky asylum system, which is the whole point. It's not part of the European Convention on Human Rights, not part of any working convention on human rights. So we're sending potential torture victims, victims of domestic, of gender violence, and victims of modern slavery. We're sending them off to Rwanda.
The UN has had absolutely no problem working with Rwanda to with refugees before. They've even praised them in the past for some of their refugee schemes. And actually, I am aware of the distinction between asylum seekers and foreign criminals. I actually referred to the case of Abu Hamza and Abu Qatada, which were quite famous instances where the ECHR was very much disrupting Theresa May, then Home Secretary, from deporting those people. But there you go. This will not be solved today. Adam Wagner, thank you very much, barrister at Doughty Street Chambers there.
Thank you, Adam. Oh, I'd like to have spoken to him for a bit longer, actually. I do think... I'm not criticising you. It's your show. I'm just here for the day. No, I just mean it's such an interesting and an in-depth issue, isn't it? I really want to understand this in more detail.
Yes, now, look, we're going back to that Kevin Spacey situation there. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is outside Westminster Magistrates Court to give us further updates. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, Kevin Spacey, after attending a half-hour hearing here at Westminster Magistrates Court, has now left a slightly more controlled exit than his arrival, but only slightly. He was still mobbed by dozens of camera crews and photographers as he left Westminster Magistrates Court to get into his vehicle to head back to his London address. Now, he appeared in court charged with 5 sexual assault counts against 3 men, dating from 2005 to 2013. Now, the first incident relates to an allegation that he assaulted a man in 2005 in London. The second incident, 2 charges of sexual assault, relate to an allegation that took place in 2008 in London, and then in 2013 a further allegation of an assault against another man now aged in his 30s. Now, Kevin Spacey's lawyer has indicated that he will be intending to robustly defend the allegations against him. He was granted unconditional bail today. He will appear again, this time at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July, because one of the 5 counts that he faces is an indictable offence, which means it can't be dealt with at a magistrate's court. It will have to be dealt with at Crown Court. So expect similar scenes again. Incredible interest, of course, because Kevin Spacey is a Hollywood A-lister, a 2-time Oscar winner who starred in some very significant and well-known movies. So there was always going to be a huge amount of interest for his court appearance here. Expect, as I say, many more photographers and camera crews when he appears next at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July.
Mark, thank you for bringing us that update. These sort of historic sexual allegations are always so difficult, aren't they? And as we mentioned, he's a massive Hollywood actor, and he's not the first person in Hollywood who's had these sorts of allegations thrown at them, really. But we'll keep an eye on that case there, and obviously update you on GB News as it happens. But I just did also want to bring you another quick update. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed that 233 people reached the UK on 6 small boats yesterday. This does not include a further 38 people who were brought ashore by the lifeboat at Dungeness around midnight. 80 people have been brought ashore today after being picked up in 2 small boats. So there you go. The boat crossings are still very much happening.
Absolutely. The whole point is this policy will not work as a deterrent, which is what it is fundamentally meant to be, until we can send people to Rwanda.
Yes, because I do think a huge proportion, a significant majority, this is an opinion, it's speculation, but I do think a huge proportion of those who would come would change their mind if they knew there's a real prospect of being sent to Rwanda. Surely
I thought you were going to say of living here with our cost of living crisis.
No.
No trains, everyone's on strike.
No. I mean, I think I can understand why they're coming here other than France, but, you know, I don't think they'd want to be sent to Rwanda instead. But after the break, we look into the American candy store investigation being carried out by Westminster Council. But before that, here's the weather.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Good morning, it is 11:26. This is To The Point with Mercy Moroki and me, Bev Turner, on GB News. We are live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now let's go to some of your views. We've had a quite packed show, so we haven't had a chance to go to them in the last 20 minutes or so.
We're not ignoring you, I promise.
Yeah, we're absolutely not. So let's read some of them out. Angie says, let's be honest here, the only people losing out if we leave the European Convention on Human Rights will be the human rights lawyer. Leaving the ECHR does not mean the end of the law. And that's the point I was making a bit, because people are some people are acting like if we leave the ECHR, then we'd have no human rights ever again.
I do worry that depending on who's in power, we will see our civil liberties compromised. But then I don't know what the alternative is. I don't really know enough about this subject to know how we might, as individuals, be at risk from losing that. But a lot of you sharing frustration about the Rwanda migration policy. Michael got in touch to say those suggesting that it might not be safe in Rwanda, which is what we heard from Adam Wagner, our lawyer, for refugees, should be asked compared to what and in whose opinion. Those protesting the loudest are predictable. You can predict their views on a range of subjects and their profiles. I'm not sure that might be a bit of a slur on Adam Wagner, who is an excellent barrister and is also very busy on social media. If you do follow Twitter and you want to understand this in more detail, do follow him.
Absolutely, I follow him. Yes, we had a robust discussion, but it was civil.
Just a little bit of mansplaining towards you.
Yes, I would say so myself. Now, let's go to another story that has been in the newspapers. Number of children being referred for treatment of type 2 diabetes in England and Wales has risen almost 50% in the last 5 years.
Diabetes UK said that alarming obesity levels and the cost of living crisis likely created the perfect storm for this increase, with nearly 1,000 children being treated for type 2 diabetes last year.
Oh, wow. Well, health and wellbeing expert Monica Price joins us now to discuss this more. Good morning, Monica. This is really quite alarming, isn't it? Because does it indicate that children are eating much more unhealthy food, or what's going on here?
Well, you're absolutely right. This report is alarming. This came from the NHS data, and Diabetes UK put this analysis together. You know, it's a staggering statistic, 50% of our children. And of course, COVID has had a huge impact on the way children have been eating, because of course we've been locked down, and of course lack of exercise because we've had to have been kept indoors. So, but the problem is here, Mercy, is that, you know, this is children we're talking about here. This is reception children. So we're talking about age 4 to 5. This is going to put a significant increase on the impact onto the NHS, of course, because once you've got type 2 diabetes, you've got indications then of obviously improving your diet, and most type 2 cases can be reversed, but it is purely down to diet. So we've really got to do something. And you would think that with all the information that we have now on healthy eating, that people would be more aware of what they're eating, and particularly because of the impact on COVID, we would perhaps become more aware of our health more than ever. But still, this was, when I saw this analysis, it really is quite alarming.
It really is. And we touched upon this yesterday. I have 3 children. Mercy has 1. It is a perpetual fight, is it not? At the till, at the shelves, to say no to your children every step of the way. We need to get the message to parents, don't we? That it's OK to say no. It's OK to disappoint your children at the ice cream van.
Yes, absolutely, Bev. I think that's the problem. We've become a sort of society of yes people, you know, but children do need guidelines. You know, they need parameters, and it's okay to say no to your child. I think one of
the
that's such a shame.
We've just lost her there. Slightly, but
we've lost Monica.
Yeah,
she froze. 50% increase. I mean,
In
this
5
isn't just about. I mean, the biggest reason for children to be admitted into hospital these days is for teeth extractions.
Oh, that's so terrible,
isn't
it?
If that doesn't tell you that we're going wrong,
because you have to eat a lot of sugar and have very poor dental habits for you to have your teeth extracted because of cavities and things. So these are people who are eating.
Not easy. We get it. We are mums. We get it. It is really hard. A friend of mine had a great suggestion. She said, just don't buy it in the house. If you just don't buy the rubbish, the chocolate, the biscuits, the sweets, all the stuff the kids want to eat, if you just don't buy it, you're just saying no to it once on the shelf. If you've got it in the house, you're saying no to the kids 20
Even
times a day.
better, buy it and hide it for yourself.
Oh, mercy.
Not advocating it, just putting it out there.
Can I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I've seen Mercy's breakfast the last 2 days. Luckily, she has a breakfast which has about 5,000 calories in it because I think she would waste away otherwise. So,
yeah, I do like snacking. I have to admit, I like snacking.
I drink my calories. Anyway.
Well, after the break, we're going to be looking to the Isle of Skye because the Isle of Skye has built, I think, 220-something homes. And it could be the answer to our prayers for those looking to buy a new home somewhere much more quieter. But we'll be going to that in just a moment.
Good morning. It's 11:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones with your headlines from the GB newsroom. The resignation letter of the Prime Minister's former ethics advisor will be published, along with Boris Johnson's reply, the government said. Downing Street has been under pressure to release the document, which is thought to explain Lord Geidt's reasons for stepping down yesterday. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. In a brief statement, he said, with regret, he feels it's the right thing to do. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey has been granted unconditional bail after being charged with sexually assaulting 3 men. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. The 62-year-old's facing 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. Mr. Spacey wasn't asked to enter pleas. His next appearance will be at Southwark Crown Court on July the 14th. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home after bodies were found. Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. The Transport Secretary says next week's rail strikes are an incredible act of self-harm. Grant Shapps says they're designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time. And he says they're an attempt to derail critical reforms. Unions have described the national rail strikes over pay, jobs and conditions as the biggest in history. TV Online and DAB+ Radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.216 to the dollar, the pound is 1.168 to the euro, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,507.33 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. This is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Bev Turner. It's 11:37 and you're watching GB News or listening to us on the radio or online this morning.
Now, sweet stores selling American-style candy with names such as Candy World, Kingdom of Sweets and American Candyland have been springing up all across the UK, with stores found in Cambridge, Edinburgh, Bath, Cardiff and at least 30 on London's Oxford Street alone.
Yeah, you were saying these are popular with your kids, weren't you?
Oh, they love them.
Yeah, well, those shops on Oxford Street have been targeted by a raid after council officers from Westminster City Council seized over £100,000 worth of dodgy sweets and vapes on Tuesday.
Sweets and vapes, honestly. They are also under investigation for failing to pay a collective $9.5 million in business rates. So here to tell us more is the leader of Westminster City Council, Adam Hugg. Good morning, Adam. Can you just help us understand a little bit more of what this story is about? What's been going on?
So, as you said, we've seen over the last couple of years since the pandemic, these stores mushrooming across Oxford Street. We've got 30 on there at the moment, but they're constantly popping in and out of existence. And one of the challenges we have is trying to identify who's running them, who's responsible for them, and making sure that they pay what they're owed, what they owe the taxpayer. Ultimately, it's almost £8 million worth of business rates that have been got out of so far, and we've seized in total almost £600,000 of fake or illegal goods in these stores. That's putting consumers at risk. It's shortchanging taxpayers, and it's damaging some of Oxford Street, which is one of the most important retail streets in the country. So there's a lot of things to do.
So Adam, so somebody will come along. There's an empty shop, and there are a lot of them at the moment. They put a very flash sign on the front. They fill it with cheap sweets they've bought from somewhere. They paint it with this American branding, which is very popular to kids because of TikTok and all this sort of American culture that they have shoved down their throats. They make a lot of money, are you saying, and then they disappear?
So what we're saying is, as I said, it's £8 million worth of business rates that have been avoided. So for example, a shop will spring up, it will open, and then it will close within the year. So the company behind it will close within the year, therefore not paying business rates. And then very similar signage, people, goods will show up in a similar empty unit nearby shortly after. So it's a game of whack-a-mole for local enforcement teams. So it's shortchanging the taxpayer, and it's putting customers at risk because, as I said, my desk earlier this week was covered with over 100 grand's worth of dodgy stuff that had been collected by our trading standards officers. That was, counterfeit Wonka bars, dodgy vapes, all sorts of things that are putting consumers at risk. So we think there needs to be a joined up approach from lots of different people.
This is incredibly serious stuff because, as you mentioned, there's the potential fraud and evading business tax rates that could be happening. But the health side is also incredibly worrying for parents because these places are obviously targeted towards children. And if they're products that do not meet standards, and if they're things like dodgy vapes, as you say, these could actually be quite harmful for children. Is there any criminal prosecutions that could take place here, perhaps?
Well, look, we're talking with the Met as part of the as one of the different agencies that we're working with on this. I can't talk to specific proceedings that may be underway at the moment, but there is enforcement action from our training standards teams. But we are working with central government, and we are looking for more support from central government to help us crack down on this problem. And ultimately, we need to go after the people who are running these stores to make sure that they're on the level. There needs to be real transparency about who owns these companies, making it harder also just to pop in and out of existence, shortchanging the taxpayer and putting people at risk. So there's a need for greater transparency and accountability on the company side, and there's need for greater enforcement on the ground from our side, which we're doing, and we're working with the Met and other agencies to try and get on top of the problem. But it needs a coordinated approach from a number of different sides.
Would you suggest that people boycott these shops? Are there some shops which are reliable? Is there, I mean, I will certainly be stopped. I don't like my kids going in them anyway, but I'll certainly be trying now more to stop them. Should we just avoid them completely, even from a health point of view?
So I think we are. What I'm not going to do is get into naming individual stores at this stage. However, that may be the next stage of the plan, and we're wanting to put increased pressure on landlords who are allowing these shops to pop up in their premises. But I think obviously there are legitimate sweet providers that long-standing shops and other firms out there, and I think there is a job of work to be done to sort of try and separate the wheat from the chaff here. And as I said, we know there are obviously reputable people who are involved in selling sweets, but this is a particular problem that we're trying to crack down on here. And ultimately, those Wonka bars that you're seeing, you have to look at the Food Standards Agency has got detailed guidance on what you need to look for to make sure whether they're legitimate or not. But the stuff that was on my desk yesterday was pretending to be produced by a company that had never heard of them and wasn't the rights holder to this. So it's also, you just need to look at what you're buying. But obviously that's really hard for your average consumer just walking up and down Oxford Street. And we as a council want to make it a safe and exciting shopping experience for people. But we need help in order to do that.
Well, thank you, Adam, for joining us. Adam Hugg, their leader of Westminster City Council. Do join us again. Yes, very worrying as well.
I'm glad that's not on my desk.
Do your research and actually probably go to trustworthy shops probably instead of these random ones that pop up. Maybe that's probably the safest thing to do. But let's return to something we're learning of in just the last few moments. Of course, we've heard about the resignation of Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, who stepped down suddenly without explanation, or issuing a very short explanation, actually. Well, his resignation letter has now been made public, and our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has the details. Darren, we're dying to know, what has Lord Geidt said in this letter?
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. Fascinating even in the essence that this letter wasn't initially published yesterday evening when Lord Geidt formally handed in his resignation to the Prime Minister. It's normally a kind of part of the course that these letters, the exchange of letters between whoever is leaving office and the Prime Minister, are released. That didn't happen, but under somewhat pressure today, it just has. And Lord Geidt has issued his letter, and it's clear in many ways, I think, from reading this letter, Mercy, that his resignation is not just related to the Partygate scandal and to the sense that the Prime Minister may, as Lord Geidt put in himself, or at least be reasonably asked whether he broke the ministerial code by receiving that fixed penalty notice, because Lord Geidt this is in relation to, and we're not entirely sure because it's not spelled out explicitly in the letter, says that he was asked to advise on measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code, which he called an odorous position and that made his difficult position already untenable. So it's kind of a cryptic clue that there is something else beyond this that clearly Lord Geidt, I think, was asked, as he says, to give advice on, that he felt went too far, and that is what has tipped him over the edge. It is a pretty strongly worded letter, as I say, that he essentially says that the ministerial codes, that when it comes to this decision, it would make a mockery, not only the respect for the code, but the licence, the suspension of the provisions and governing the conduct of Her Majesty's ministers, and I can have no part in this. So quite an extraordinary letter in many regards. Boris Johnson has replied saying that he is surprised by Lord Geidt's resignation. We heard from Downing Street, didn't we, yesterday, suggestions that Lord Geidt, even as late as Monday, was suggesting that he wanted to serve in the role for the next 6 months. But Boris Johnson has said that his letter came as a surprise, but that in the end he thanks him for his service. All of this, in many ways, Mercy, raises more questions than it answers. That is certainly true. It does continue to pile pressure on the Prime Minister. Clearly, losing an ethics advisor is pretty difficult stuff. Losing 2 in the space of a year is incredibly difficult, given the fact there have only been 4 ethics advisors since 2006. So, you know, for the one Prime Minister to lose 2 is not great. And as I say, MPs will be poring over this letter, this exchange of letters, and asking what this means for the Prime Minister. But again, it puts him back in a tricky position, and it puts him in a position in which a week in which we've been talking about Rwanda and the Northern Ireland Protocol and the rail strikes, that we're now again talking about Boris Johnson's integrity, is clearly not very good for the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Political editor Darren McCaffrey there. You know, that news isn't even online yet. Be it with GB News for all the breaking. Well done, Darren. Thank you very much for bringing us that. I was wanting to look at the letter in more detail. It isn't available there online. We beat them to it.
Yeah, indeed. And it's quite worrying, actually, because what he said this week, these are his words in this letter. This week, I was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. That's quite a serious
It is. It's a very
accusation,
serious,
isn't it?
Yep.
So, yeah, we'll obviously cover the fallout of all of that across the channel on GB News. But now, moving on to a happier story, I think.
I think so. Yeah. An interesting story, a little bit odd. A housing association is planning to build nearly 250 new homes on the Isle of Skye, near the region's biggest town of Portree, considered to be one of the 20 most beautiful villages in the UK and Ireland.
Yes, but with a population of just over 2,000 residents and a distance of over 5 hours to Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, will anyone actually take up these new affordable homes?
I'm sure they will. Our next guest, Rory Stewart, is a Skye resident who was elected the first Scottish Conservative councillor for Ailna. Is it Ailna region, Rory?
Ailna.
Oh, thank you. Wow. I'll let you do that. And you are joining us now. Thank you very much. Now, you are a Skye resident, as I say. You were first elected Scottish Conservative councillor. Why this number of houses on such a small island?
I think with this development, it's very welcome in the local community, because what we've seen recently is exodus of working age people from Skye, and it is a real concern for the local community, given the fact that our hospitals are struggling to find staff, our schools are struggling to get staff, our local services are really at a crisis point. And a development of this size, while it will be completed as a phased approach over 15 to 20 years in 6 to 8 phases, it'll really allow the services to catch up, but also provide the key workers and young families into our island community that we desperately need.
So who are these houses targeted to then? Because you say you do need workers for the local services which are understaffed. So are you basically trying to attract sort of the workers that you need, maybe people working in healthcare and things like that? Or is this actually open to anybody who might be interested?
I think the project is still in early early days, but I think one of the key things that's been put forward so far is there will be a real mix of different kinds of properties and ownership sort of options available within this development. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to have a bit of something for everybody. And I do think, although it is a large number of houses, I do think we'll definitely have the uptake, because there is lots of people currently living on Skye that are looking for a house of their own.
Come on, sell it to us. Do your best estate agent's moment. This is your big moment. What would we get if we moved to the Isle of Skye? Is everyone as friendly and laid back as you?
Oh, I'd like to think so, yes. It's a wonderful place, and there is a real sense of community still on Skye, which is something that I've, growing up, have really found to love and enjoy. So as well as the people being friendly, I mean, it's a really unique opportunity with people being able to work more from home now. It's a real opportunity to bring your high quality skilled job onto the island. And, you know, if you can choose to work from anywhere, why not choose to work somewhere as beautiful as Skye?
And can you go swimming every day, Rory, in that beautiful ocean? It looks absolutely idyllic.
Oh, it's a bit cold most of the year, but no, there is a couple of things out in the water that people do, a lot of sailing and fishing. So it is lots of things to keep busy despite the scenery. You know, there's a lot more to Skye than just the blue sky.
Oh, it looks absolutely amazing. I'm incredibly jealous that you get to wake up to that every day.
It does look gorgeous, doesn't it? And people forget that we have sites like that so close to us, don't we? That's why I always think, maybe don't go on holiday to all these countries abroad. We've got so much here to see in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and do we know roughly what these cost of these houses might be, Rory? I mean, they're affordable. I know it might be a bit early, and I am testing your estate agent limits here, but what kind of price range do you think they might be?
Again, I think it is too early on in the development process to provide comment on that, but it's because just the nature of it, there will be a good mix of and I'm hoping from my point of view as a local councillor to ensure that there is truly affordable for everybody, because it isn't just our lower paid workers, it is our doctors and our nurses, our teachers. You know, we do need to encourage everybody to stay in our communities, to keep our schools open and all of that. So I do think, and I would hope to see there's a mix of truly affordable housing as well as a full sheet of properties, so there's a little bit of something for everyone.
OK, thank you so much. I think you're going to have a stampede, actually. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I think there'll be a lot of people right now, especially off the back of the pandemic. We all kind of reassessed our priorities, didn't we, and said more open space, more time with the kids, better work-life balance.
My best friend's, he's Kenyan, and he's actually gone, because his job is entirely remote, and he's actually moved back to Kenya. He went, I think, in December. He's planning to stay till November, because he's just said, I can work from home, so I'm going to go somewhere much hotter and, you know, somewhere I could be closer to my family. So there is lots of
carrying on a British-based job.
Yeah. So there are lots of opportunities for that. Yes, well, now for the end of the programme, let's take you through some of the lighter headlines of the day that you might have missed. A midwife-led report has concluded that terms such as normal or natural birth should be dropped in favour of language that is factual.
That's right. This, to be honest, I worked in this area. I wrote a book called The Happy Birth Book, and I've worked in this area for 10 years. And this study from the Royal College of Midwives found that some women feel judged by language that suggests their labours have failed, or that somehow their birth experience has been abnormal. This is a conversation which has been going on for 20 years in birth. The idea is that it's focusing too much on the idea. We shouldn't say normal and abnormal, because it makes people having caesareans feel that they are being judged in some way, but it's going to carry on
going. But surely it is normal, because it's what happens in the majority of cases. But even statistically, it's the exception. If something's the exception, then by definition, surely it's not the normal way to deliver. And I do get why some women might be upset, but I think natural birth is natural birth because it's how nature has intended it.
You know, this has come out of some of these inquiries we've had, particularly the Telford one, which found that babies' lives were lost. The conclusion was because there was an emphasis on natural birth in order to keep caesarean rates low. But that's a very different issue. The language around birth is a whole. You know, you do, if you're in labour and you don't, anybody watching who's had a baby or has been there when someone had a baby, failure to progress. Like, the language is very Victorian. It does make women feel somehow that it's a judgment on them, but it isn't.
Yes, well, interesting. Let's go to a couple of views because we do have about a minute left.
I can carry on talking about birth if you want.
Well, I
it's
mean,
one of my specialist subjects. The difference, see, what you can do is you can describe it. Well, in my book, I say
what would you call it?
Abdominal birth and vaginal birth, and that takes away. So an abdominal birth is a cesarean, and a vaginal birth. Has Patrick Christie's ever said vaginal on this show?
He said many, many things on this show, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. Well, look, we have come to the end of the programme now. Thank you, Bev. You've been great.
I'm glad I've lowered the tone just before I leave.
You haven't met Patrick, if you think you're lowering the tone.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Well, up next is the beautiful, lovely Gloria De Piero with the briefing.
Hello, it's going to turn fine and dry across the bulk of the UK in the next couple of days. There will be some rain in the northwest through Thursday, but elsewhere it'll be fine, dry and turning increasingly hot and humid. If we look at the pressure pattern then through the rest of Thursday, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. And as we head into Thursday into Friday, we start to drag in a more southerly airflow, and that's really going to lift those temperatures. So I think Friday will be the peak of the heat, where we could see temperatures in the low to locally mid-30s. Back to Thursday afternoon, then you can see some rain towards the north and the west, affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland, some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Aberdeenshire. But elsewhere across the bulk of England, Wales, Northern England as well, it'll be fine and dry. Variable amounts of cloud at times in the west, but still plenty of sunshine to come. And in that southeast corner, look at these temperatures. We could see highs of 29 or 30 degrees. That would make it the warmest day of the year so far. Still cooler, though, towards the north and the west. So we head through the rest of Thursday into the evening and overnight, then you can see heavy, more persistent rain spreading in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. So turning quite wet here, some strong winds developing as well. But elsewhere across the bulk of England and Wales, it'll be another dry night, variable amounts of cloud and a warm and muggy night to come, particularly in the south, where we can see lows just falling to 19 or 20 degrees, a little bit cooler further towards the north. As we look into Friday, then you can see that heavy rain still affecting much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, continuing for much of the day, slowly pushing its way southwards as we head through the day. But elsewhere across England and Wales, look at this, fine, dry, plenty of sunshine, and with those southerly winds that I mentioned, temperatures really will lift. So probably the peak of the heat, like I said, we could see widely temperatures across England and Wales into the low 30s, but in the southeast corner, 33 or 34 degrees, quite exceptional for the time of the year. Once again,